You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Hey folks, welcome to Thursday evening. Yes, it's the last day of the week before the last day of the work week. So welcome to it. I hope you had a good day. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can come over and watch the simulcast of this broadcast in video, the best part being that there is a live chat room there where you can join the other Intrepids, talk about this show, and a myriad of other things that goes on over there. You can find that at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over and join us all. Now, I want to pick up a little bit about what I was talking about toxicity yesterday, before we get into our topic for the night, which is the ghost dance. And toxicity, you've encountered toxic people, you know what they are, you know who they are, and I want to give you 6 thoughts for dealing with toxic behavior. In a sense, this is preparing yourself in advance to ward off toxic people. And it's a way of protecting ourselves from being that way. Now, Niall, our friend from Ireland, brought up in last night's chat room that everybody is toxic. Yeah, to a certain degree, many of us can be. It's not that we are constantly toxic, but we all do toxic things. We've all done stuff in our lives that another person will say, you're a toxic person. When you go, wait, I'm not toxic. So there are things in people's lives that make them the way they are. And these are ways that you can look at the stuff that's coming at you, but you can also turn this around and look at yourself and say, are there things I can do to prevent myself from being toxic? Many times, toxic behavior aimed at you in particular is something that another person has that's an unresolved issue for them. And many times it's a defense mechanism. I don't want people to know what I'm really like or what I'm really all about or the things, so I will become toxic externally. And that turns into people, there's gaslighting, there's all of this and that. I've been accused of all of that. And I don't believe I engage in any of that. But I've been accused of it in the past. And so I have to, when people accuse me, even though I might disagree, I have to take a step back and look inward and say, are there things I need to look at? Am I doing something wrong here? Have I done something wrong to give somebody that impression? So, all I want to say about toxic people now is there's things you can do to prevent them from creating damage to yourself. And I think this is important for us all to know because we talked about toxicity last night. We all know what toxic people look like. They're people you don't necessarily want to be around because you know it's the negativity of life is all that spills out of them. And they will toxify you. I tend to be a very up person. I'm very optimistic. I'm not pessimistic, but you get me around a pessimist, I will do my damnedest to be as optimistic and realistic as I can, and sometimes I even let that pessimism drag me down. It gets me in the doldrums. So whether in social situations or in your workplace, we're going to encounter people who are toxic. And what comes closest to defining the behavior is recognizing that there are different scenarios where it comes up and there are different scenarios that make people be toxic. People with toxic behavior are going to often be disrespectful on boundaries. They may speak critically of others or rudely to others. They may sometimes frequently interrupt you or interrupt other people who are in their conversation. The worst, they'll likely manipulate others to meet their own needs. And the worst, they're going to undercut colleagues or friends to their own advantage. And people do this when they're toxic to build them, to make themselves look better. I must diminish others in order to build myself up and to make me look better. Toxic people are manipulative people. Their modus operandi is to get people to do what they want them to do. And it's all about them. They use other people to accomplish whatever their goal happens to be. They forget what you want. This is not about equality in a relationship, any kind of a relationship. It's far from it. It's not about equality at all. It's about getting your way. And it's like I said when Rainey and I were in counseling ourselves. Counselor asked us, do you want to be right or do you want to be married? And you sometimes have to make that choice and expand that out into other areas, broaden that definition. So how toxic people affect you, dealing with toxic people anywhere, at home, at work, can be a challenge, particularly in the workplace, and particularly if you have like a toxic boss. There have been major studies assessing the problems of toxic environments and what leaders can do to address the problem, which, if it remains unchecked, leads to reduced workplace productivity. People aren't productive under aggressively toxic leadership. And for many years, women struggled in the workplace and often found themselves sabotaged, frequently by another woman. I saw somebody made a statement today, the worst misogynists out there are women. And that's not a statement on feminism or a statement against women, by the way. That's in context. I am making that statement. Because frequently other women sabotage other women. And there's an all too familiar scenario occurred when someone cozied up to a coworker, plied her for secrets, and then shared the secrets with others in the department. In several studies, there have been many interviews with women who were undercut by colleagues, people that they thought were their friends in the workplace. And the stories portray women who feel the need to take from another hard-earned position or place, who feel that in order to succeed, it's necessary to manipulate rather than create, to take rather than earn. And women who are victims of this should be aware that such behavior can be manipulated by men behind the scenes. So this is across the board. This is pansexual, you could say, pangender. So how can a toxic person be handled? Confront without being confrontational. That's it. Do you know how to do that? Do you know what that means? How do you confront somebody without being confrontational? Point out the facts to the person. Remain free of getting emotionally sucked in and then walk away from it. Protecting yourself from a toxic personality from a social perspective involving family, friends, neighbors. Most people rely on their instincts or their careful decision-making strategies. And when encountering toxic people, I've got 6 suggestions here for dealing with those people before resorting to the ultimate solution, which is cutting them out of your life, which I said a lot yesterday when talking about toxicity. Just walk away from them, cut them out before it gets worse. Now, here's some 6 things you can do. Number 1, understand how the toxic person, is affecting you. In many cases, the person is intrusive and annoying, has no problem interrupting you when you're speaking to someone else. So be aware of this and do your best to avoid that person. Now, we all know that kind of person. We all deal with that kind of person. Person who won't let you speak. The person who doesn't want to hear what... They don't want you to speak. Because they believe that what they have to say is more important than anything they need to listen to coming from you. So beware of that kind of thing. Understand how that person affects you. Do they leave you feeling like, hey, I don't ever get to express myself? And if I do, the toxic person walks away from you. So, because they don't want to have any of that. Number 2, confront without being confrontational. Privately, take this person aside. State the behavior that you find disturbing and firmly point out that there's going to be consequences if it continues. Then walk away before getting into harmful exchanges. This is effective when you catch a person being rude to other people, when you catch a person gossiping about other people or about you. When you see this, call them on it. but know that they'll deny such behavior. They'll even lie about it and try to manipulate their version of the story. I had this just very recently where somebody was gossiping about me. And of course, they did this in open, but they didn't include me in that conversation. They didn't even tag me in a Facebook, social media. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't even on their friends list, so I wouldn't have seen it. Somebody else pointed it out to me. So I wrote that person privately, and I said, hey, if you and I have something to talk about, here's my phone number. Call me. And I said, if you can gossip about me in a public forum without ever having talked to me, maybe you should take a few minutes to come and talk to me personally. See what the problem is and where it lies. So confrontation without being confrontational. I didn't come on that person and chew them out or be nasty. I just said, here's what you ought to do. Give me a call if you're going to talk about me. Number 3, be prepared for the toxic person's drama. People who are needy and toxic almost always have a family drama to report, a list of ailments or perceived slights that they use as a way of evoking your sympathy. And when they come into your space, put an immediate stop to the situation. Kindly but emphatically say, I wish I had time to talk to you right now, but I don't. Maybe we can catch up another time. Now, that's a brush off. I don't necessarily like doing that. And I also don't like embarrassing other people in front of other people. If somebody's saying something, I might slip over and go, hey, why don't you come and talk to me about this later? So there are ways to confront the person without being confrontational and to be prepared for them to pose their drama as a reason for what they're doing. 4, make it a point to avoid toxic people. When the conversation is unavoidable, keep it short and then leave it alone. You'll often won't need to engage in conversation because toxic people prefer to hear themselves talk and are not really interested in what you have to say. However, when you're caught in a situation meant to tear at your heartstrings or tear at who you are, you got to offer some sympathy, you got to move on. Now, I've been my own victim of my own wanting to confront and talk through things with somebody, especially in public forums. If I post something and say, here's a good example. This last weekend, a good friend of mine said that they were having a tough time dealing with how to relate or behave after all the shootings they see, and they were definitely in the Black Lives Matter camp. And they were talking about this guy that got shot 7 times by the police over the weekend. And he did survive, by the way. He's still alive. And I said, my only comment was, I said, just as a note, I said 3 cops were ambushed and killed at the same time this last weekend. And of course, the onslaught of negativity down to character assassination of me took place. And so I talked with a lot of these people. I said, if you want to talk about that in public, let's go. I said, but why don't you give me a call and we'll sort it out. Nobody's called me, but I had some long, lengthy conversations in a public thread saying, well, you're saying this, here's my response to that. So it can happen. You can get caught in situations. I found myself doing that at times. So number 5, set up firm boundaries. Remind people to call you before visiting. And when they disrespect your wishes, you may go to the open door and say, I'm sorry, this isn't a good time for me. Don't let people, I've known people we've talked to even here in the chat room, known people who let people walk all over them. They don't stop things. It's okay if somebody is violating your personal boundaries on something, and if it's especially if it's a toxic situation. It may not always be toxic. It just may be somebody who doesn't know how to act in that particular kind of a social setting. But it's okay to say to somebody, hey, I can't do that right now, or I can't talk about that right now. Let's set up a time and we'll talk about it. So number 6, build a wall around yourself to stay safe. If you wish to remain in a friendship or a relationship Or if it's a working relationship and you have no choice, you have to be prepared for the frustrations of this kind. You may feel sorry for the person, you may want to help, but this is rarely possible. And now these are all, of course, focused on the way toxic people can act. Toxicity isn't always something that's directly aimed at you to be a negative. Toxicity can just be somebody has their own issues and they will infect you with that. And so you have to put up certain walls, I will rather call them boundaries, to keep people from violating that boundary you put up. Now keep in mind that people with toxic personalities aren't going to take no for an answer. They'll quietly harass you until they get what they want from you. Your friendship, your time, your information. Sometimes such people are just going to want to get enough information about you so they can use that information to gossip to others about you as a way of pretending or imagining that you're close friends. Now, I want you to take a look at this stuff. If you see yourself in any of these kinds of scenarios, you probably shouldn't not admit to it. And that said, the toxic person will not admit to seeing themselves as other people do. And there are theories about toxic people, those who have a wish to help them. But according to Dr. Brenner, who wrote a book on this stuff, there's a general sense that they have no interest in therapy or change. In fact, they often see themselves as innocent and frequently play the victim. So that's some thoughts on toxicity. And that's maybe a little different brand of toxicity. And so toxic people are tough in our lives. They sometimes make us stop and go, whoa. And this ties into gossip. It ties into confrontation of gossip. It ties into all of those things. Sometimes the toxic person is going to make you step back and say, do I need to take an inward look? And then you do a little inward evaluation and make sure that you're acting the right way. That's all I got to say about that today. I didn't want to spend the whole first segment on that again. And we've got more things that we can talk about this, and we probably will as time commences here, as we get closer to the end of this particular series on Native America and the conquering of the American West. So today, we're going to get into, and we've got just a few minutes left in this segment, but let's start to get into it. Remember last night we were talking about how the ghost dance was picking up, the spiritual act of the Native Americans who believed that they had met the Messiah in a second coming, sort of, to the Native American. And who are we to say it didn't happen? There are a lot of Christians who say Jesus only came when he came. Now there's somebody else saying, well, the Messiah can take many forms. And the Native Americans started believing they were having these visions of the Messiah. And so what we have looked at so far has been the spread of the ghost dance in and around 1889 to 1890. By mid-November, ghost dancing was so prevalent on the Sioux reservations that almost all other activities came to a halt. No pupils appeared at the schools, the trading stores were empty, no work was done on the little farms, and at Pine Ridge Reservation, frightened agents telegraphed Washington. Now remember this telegraph? We mentioned this last night. He said, Indians are dancing in the snow and are wild and crazy. We need protection and we need it now. The leaders should be arrested and confined at some military post until the matter is quieted, and this should be done at once. Now, the interesting thing is they've already taken away all their weapons. They've taken away all their horses. They've confined them to reservations. They're starving. They're poor. And he said we should be afraid of them because they're doing a spiritual dance. Now, Short Bull led his band of believers down White River into the Badlands. And in a few days, their numbers swelled to more than 3,000 people. And disregarding the wintry weather, they donned their ghost shirts, and they danced from each dawn and far into the nights. And Short Bull told the dancers not to fear the soldiers if they come to stop the ceremonies. Their horses will sink into the earth, they said, and then the riders will jump from their horses, and they will sink into the earth as well. So at Cheyenne River, Bigfoot's band increased to about 600, mostly widows. And when the agent tried to interfere, Bigfoot took the dancers off the reservation to a sacred place on Deep Creek. And now this is where we left off last night. On November 20th of 1890, the Indian Bureau in Washington ordered agents in the field to telegraph the names of all fomenters of disturbances, they called it, and among the ghost dancers. And so a list was quickly assembled in Washington and transmitted to Bearcoat Miles' Army headquarters in Chicago. Now, Miles saw Sitting Bull's name among the fomenters, and he immediately assumed that he was to blame for all the disturbances because Sitting Bull was the leader of the Sioux. And Sitting Bull took command, and Sitting Bull resisted. So Miles knew that a forced arrest by soldiers would create trouble. He wanted Sitting Bull removed quietly. And so to accomplish this, Bearcoat called on one of the few white men that Sitting Bull ever liked or trusted, Buffalo Bill Cody. Now, Buffalo Bill agreed to visit Sitting Bull and to try to persuade him to come to Chicago for a conference with Miles. And the record is a little unclear as to whether or not Cody knew that if he succeeded in this mission, he would be taking Sitting Bull to a military prison. I would like to believe that Bill Cody would not have engaged in anything that would have ended up in subterfuge and locking up Sitting Bull in prison. So when Buffalo Bill arrived at Standing Rock, he met with an uncooperative agent. Fearful that Cody would botch the arrest and the attempted arrest and only arouse Sitting Bull's anger, McLaughlin quickly arranged for Washington to rescind the showman's authority. And without even seeing Sitting Bull, Cody left Standing Rock in really bad mood. And he returned to Chicago. Now, meanwhile, at Pine Ridge, the Army had already brought in troops, creating a tense situation between the Indians and the military. A former agent, Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy, was sent there to make recommendations for a resolution of the difficulties. "I should let the dance continue," McGillicuddy said. "The coming of the troops has frightened the Indians. If the Seventh-day Adventists prepared their ascension robes for the second coming of the Savior, the United States Army is not put in motion to prevent them. Why should not the Indians have the same privilege? If they want to wear the ghost dance shirts and dance because they believe there's a second coming, why are we using the military to stop them? We didn't do it to the Seventh-day Adventers. Didn't do it to the Mormons. And so, why should the Indians not have the same privilege?" McGillicuddy said. "If the troops remain, trouble is going to follow." Now, this viewpoint, however, was not to prevail. On December 12th, Lieutenant Colonel William F. Drum, commanding troops at Fort Yates, received orders from General Miles to, quote, "secure the person of Sitting Bull, call on Indian Agent McLaughlin to cooperate, and render such assistance as will best promote the purpose in view." And this, you can find this particular quote as the U.S. Commissioner of Indian Affairs in his report in 1891. So, we got to go out to break, folks. You sit tight for a couple of minutes. When we come back, we're going to pick this up right where we left off. Sit tight.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, we're back. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You're also able to come over and watch the video simulcast on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And come on over and join the live chat room that's going on right now. Join up with the other Intrepids. Can talk about this show, your viewpoints on this, or you'll find there's a lot of other things that get talked about over there as well. So come on over and enjoy yourself. Let's continue on where we left off at the end of the first segment. Now, we just saw that McGillicuddy, the former Indian agent at Standing Rock, said that why are we sending out troops to stop the spiritual dancing and prayers and donning of spiritual garments by the Indians that we wouldn't do if it were Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists, he quotes specifically. He said, I don't think that you should bring the military in. The military is going to exacerbate a situation or create a situation that doesn't exist other than spiritual, religious dancing. And remember, Wovoka, the prophet, who is pushing and promoting the ghost dance, one of his philosophies that he put onto the Native American tribes was, do no violence. He said, don't harm the whites, wish them well. He says, but dance the dance. Pray. Give yourself up to peacefulness. And he said, don't give them any reason, in other words, to think that you're being hostile. Treat them well. So just before daybreak, on December 15th of 1890, 43 Indian police surrounded Sitting Bull's log cabin. Now, 3 miles away, a squadron of cavalry waited as a support force if needed. This is to arrest quietly Sitting Bull. Lieutenant Bullhead, the Indian policeman in charge of the party, found Sitting Bull asleep on the floor. When he was awakened, the chief stared incredulously at Bullhead. What do you want here? And you are my prisoner, said Bullhead. You must go to the agency. Sitting Bull yawned, according to the reports, yawned and sat up. All right, he replied. Let me put on my clothes and I'll go with you. He asked the policeman to have his horse saddled. When Bullhead emerged from the cabin with Sitting Bull, he found a crowd of ghost dancers gathering outside. They outnumbered the police at least 4-1. Catch the Bear, one of the dancers, moved toward Bullhead. You think you're going to take him? Catch the Bear shouted. You shall not do it. Come now, Bullhead said quietly to his prisoner. Do not listen to anyone. But Sitting Bull held back, making it necessary for Bullhead and Sergeant Red Tomahawk to force him toward his horse. At this moment, Catch the Bear threw off his blanket and brought up a rifle. You can see, you know where this is going already. And you can see how Indians were provoked to violence. Now, he shouldn't have brought up his rifle, but you can see how this is being provoked. Now, at this moment, Catch the Bear, he withdrew his rifle. He fired at Bullhead, wounding him in the side. As Bullhead fell, he tried to shoot his assailant, Catch the Bear, But the bullet struck Sitting Bull instead. Almost simultaneously, Red Tomahawk took his revolver and shot Sitting Bull through the head and killed him. Now, during the firing, the old show horse that Buffalo Bill had presented to Sitting Bull began to go through his tricks. Remember, at the sound of a gunshot, he was supposed to bow, or lean down, the way a horse bows, the way they train him to do that. He sat upright, raised one hoof, and it seemed to those who watched that he was performing the dance of the ghosts. But as soon as the horse ceased his dancing and wandered away, the wild fighting resumed, and only the arrival of the cavalry detachment saved the Indian police from absolute extinction at that moment. So they just murdered Sitting Bull. And all of this is as a result of the Native Americans practicing a spiritual ritual, being told, do no harm to the whites, live in peace among all men, abstain from drinking alcohol, don the ghost shirt and dance the ghost dance. The Messiah is coming again. That was the message they were given. And because whites started thinking this is the start of this is how uprisings start, they needed to arrest those who were in charge of the people. Now, Sitting Bull wasn't pushing the ghost dance, but he was the chief, and he thought it was okay that they were doing this. And you can see, even when they came to arrest him, as the testimony says, he yawned, he sat up, he says, all right, he says, let me get dressed. And then saddle up my horse and let's go. So, all of this is leading up to Wounded Knee. Red Cloud said this: there was no hope on earth, and God seemed to have forgotten us. Some said they saw the Son of God. Others didn't see him. If he had come, he would do some great things as he had done before. We doubted it because we had neither seen him nor his works. The people did not know. They did not care. They snatched at the hope. They screamed like crazy men to him for mercy. Sorry about that, folks. I forgot to shut off my ringer on my phone. They screamed like crazy men to him for mercy. They caught at the promise they heard he had made. The white men were frightened and called for soldiers. We had begged for life, and the white men thought we wanted theirs. We heard that soldiers were coming. We did not fear. We hoped that we could tell them our troubles and get help. A white man said the soldiers meant to kill us. We did not believe it, but some were frightened and ran away to the Badlands. That was Red Cloud. Now, had it not been for the sustaining force of the ghost dance religion, the Sioux, in their grief and anger over the assassination of Sitting Bull, might have risen up against the guns of the soldiers. Pardon me. So prevalent was their belief that the white men would soon disappear, and that with the next greening of the grass, that their dead relatives and their ancestors and friends would return in resurrection, they made no retaliations. It was the ghost dance that prevented them from fighting. Now, that didn't prevent the one guy from pulling out a rifle and trying to stop them from arresting Sitting Bull. So you had your standouts. So by the hundreds, however, the leaderless Hunkpapas fled from Standing Rock Reservation, seeking refuge in one of the ghost dance camps, or with the last of the great chiefs, Red Cloud, at Pine Ridge Reservation. So in the moon when the deer shed their horns, this is December 17th, about 100 of these fleeing Hunkpapas reached Bigfoot's Minneconjou camp near Cherry Creek. That same day, the War Department issued orders for the arrest and the imprisonment of Bigfoot. He was on the list of fomenters of disturbances, quote unquote. And so as soon as Bigfoot learned that Sitting Bull had been killed, he started his people toward Pine Ridge, hoping that Red Cloud could protect them from the soldiers. En route, he fell ill of pneumonia. And when hemorrhaging began, he was coughing up blood. He had to travel in a wagon. On December 28th of 1890, as they neared Porcupine Creek, the Minneconjous sighted 4 troops of cavalry approaching. Bigfoot immediately ordered a white flag run up on his wagon, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon he raised up from his blankets to greet Major Samuel Whiteside, the 7th U.S. Cavalry. Remember the 7th Cavalry? That was Custer's cavalry. Bigfoot's blankets were stained with blood from his lungs, and as he talked in a hoarse whisper with Whiteside, red drops fell from his nose and froze in the bitter cold. Whiteside told Bigfoot that he had orders to take him to the cavalry camp on Wounded Knee Creek. The Minneconjou chief replied that he was going in that direction. He was taking his people to Pine Ridge for safety. So turning to his half-breed scout, John Shangro, pardon me, Major Whiteside, it's Whitside, I think, there's no E in there, ordered him to begin disarming Bigfoot's band. Let me take a sip of coffee. Even though it's growing cool. Look here, Major, Shangro replied. If you do that, there is liable to be a fight here, and if there is, you're going to kill all those women and children, and the men will get away from you. Whitside insisted that his orders were to capture Bigfoot's Indians and disarm and dismount them. We better take them to camp and then take their horses from them and their guns there, Shangro declared. All right, Whiteside agreed. You tell Bigfoot to move down to camp at Wounded Knee. And all this whole exchange here is something that you can find. I think it's in the Congressional Report. Let me double check my footnote here. No, this was from Robert Utley's The Last Days of the Sioux Nation. That was Yale Press in 1963. And Utley, you've seen him. I'm not sure if Utley is still alive. He's a historian. You see him in a lot of documentaries on Native America. And so this was from his book, this little exchange. Now, the major glanced at the ailing chief and then gave an order for his army ambulance to be brought forward. The ambulance would be warmer and would give Bigfoot an easier ride than the jolting, springless wagons. And after the chief was transferred to the ambulance, Whitside formed a column for the march to Wounded Knee Creek. And 2 troops of cavalry took the lead, the ambulance and the wagons following. The Indians herded into a compact group behind them, and with the other 2 cavalry troops and a battery of 2 Hotchkiss guns bringing up the rear. Now twilight was beginning to fall when the column crawled over the last rise in the land and began descending the slope toward Chunkpe Opi-Wakpala, the creek called Wounded Knee. Remember that. Just say that. Chunkpe Opi-Kawala. Chunkpe Opi-Wakpala. There it is. Chunkpe Opi-Wankala. One more time. Chunkpe Opi-Wakpala. That is Wounded Knee. In Lakota. Chunkpe Opi-Wakpala. Now, the wintry dusk and the tiny crystals of ice dancing in the dying light added a kind of a supernatural quality to the somber landscape. And somewhere along this frozen stream, the heart of Crazy Horse lay in a secret place, a secret grave. Remember, his parents buried him there. Bury my heart at Wounded Knee. And the ghost dancers believed that his disembodied spirit was waiting impatiently for this new earth that would surely come with the first grass of spring. Now, at the cavalry tent camp on Wounded Knee Creek, the Indians were halted and carefully counted. There were 120 men and 230 women and children. Because of the gathering of darkness, Major Whitside decided to wait until morning before disarming his prisoners. So he assigned them a camping area immediately to the south of the military camp, issued them rations, and as there was a shortage of teepee covers, he furnished them several military tents. So he's at least trying to treat them humanely. And while Whiteside ordered a stove placed in Bigfoot's tent, and sent a regimental surgeon to administer to the sick chief. And so to make certain that none of his prisoners escaped, the major stationed 2 troops of cavalry as sentinels around the Sioux teepee, and then posted his 2 Hotchkiss guns at the top of a rise overlooking the camp. The barrels of these rifled guns, which could hurl explosive charges for more than 2 miles, were positioned to rake the length of the Indian lodges. Sorry, I got a scratch in my throat now. And of course, I still, after a year of doing this radio show, have not gotten myself a soundboard with a mute button. I'll do that eventually here. All right. So this is the setting now. The Sioux are all encamped there. There's 120 men, 230 women and children, and they're all in this camp. The major set up tents where they didn't have enough teepee covers. He put a stove for heat in Bigfoot's tent and gave the company surgeon orders to administer to him. So he's being humane, but in the morning they're going to disarm them, take away their ponies, they're going to bring them to the reservation. So later in the darkness of that December night, the remainder of the 7th Regiment marched in from the east, and they quietly bivouacked north of Major Whitside's troops. Colonel James W. Forsyth, commanding Custer's former regiment, now took charge of the operations. He informed Whitside that he'd received orders to take Bigfoot's band to the Union Pacific Railroad for shipment to a military prison in Omaha, Nebraska. So they're not going to make them walk. They're going to put them on boxcars. Now, after placing 2 more Hotchkiss guns on the slope beside the others, Forsyth and his officers settled down for the evening with a keg of whiskey to celebrate the capture of Bigfoot. Now, the chief lay in his tent, too ill to sleep, barely able to breathe, and even with their protective ghost shirts that they were wearing, and their belief in the prophecies of this new Messiah and the ghost dance religion, his people were fearful of the pony soldiers camped all around them. So 14 years before, on the Little Bighorn, some of these warriors had helped defeat some of these soldier chiefs, Moylan, Varnum, Wallace, Godfrey, Edgerly, and the Indians wondered if the revenge could still be in their hearts. This was the 7th Cavalry surrounding them. Now, the following morning, there was a bugle call, said Wasumaza, one of Bigfoot's warriors, who years afterward was to change his name to Dewey Beard. And then I said, think of that, even that name. It's an English name, it's an American name, Dewey Beard. But, you wonder if it didn't, Dewey Beard, wet in the beard, who knows? So Dewey Beard is his name, just like they called gray beard, white beard, long hair, so on. So Dewey Beard said this, years after what's going to take place now. Then I saw the soldiers mounting their horses and surrounding us. It was announced that all men should come to the center for a talk, and after that, the talk, they were to move on to Pine Ridge Agency. Bigfoot was brought out of his teepee and sat in front of his tent, and the older men were gathered around him and sitting right near him in the center. Now, after issuing hardtack for the breakfast rations, Colonel Forsyth informed the Indians that they were now to be disarmed. They called for guns and arms, White Lance said. So all of us gave the guns, and they were stacked up in the center of the camp. The soldier chiefs were not satisfied with the number of weapons. They looked at them and they said, these ain't all your guns. And so they sent details of troopers to search the teepees. They would go right into the tents and come out with bundles and tear them open, Dog Chief said. They brought out our axes, our knives, and our tent stakes, and they piled them near the guns. So they took everything that they had. And this was written by James H. Mcgregor, The Wounded Knee Massacre, from the viewpoint of the survivors. And he wrote this book. It was published with Baltimore Press, Worth Brothers Press, in 1940. So about 50 years after this incident, he wrote his book. So, folks, you can tell it's coming. And if you don't know all this already, this history, prepare yourselves for what's coming next. Still not satisfied, the soldier chiefs ordered the warriors to remove their blankets and submit to searches for weapons. The Indians' faces showed their anger, but only the medicine man, Yellowbird, made any overt protest. You know what he did to protest? He danced a few ghost dance steps, and he chanted one of the holy songs, assuring the warriors that the soldiers' bullets could not penetrate their sacred garments. "The bullets will not go toward you," he chanted in Sioux. "The prairie is large, and the bullets will not go toward you." So this is what he said. This was in Utley's book. And now the troopers found only 2 more rifles. One of them a new Winchester belonging to a young Minneconjou named Black Coyote. Now Black Coyote raised the Winchester above his head, shouting that he paid a lot of money for the rifle and that it belonged to him. They couldn't have it. Some years afterwards, Dewey Beard recalled that Black Coyote was stone cold deaf. If they left him alone, he was going to put his gun down where he should. They grabbed him instead and spinned him in the east direction. He was still unconcerned even then. He hadn't his gun pointed at anyone. His intention was to put that gun down. They came on and grabbed the gun that he was going to put down, and right after they spun him around, there was a report of the gun. The gun went off, and it was quite loud. I couldn't say that anybody was shot, but following that was a crash. Now, it sounded much like the sound of tearing canvas. That was the crash, Rough Feather said. Afraid of the enemy described it as a lightning crash. Turning Hawk said that Black Coyote was a crazy man, a young man of very bad influence, and in fact a nobody. He said that Black Coyote fired his gun and that immediately the soldiers returned fire. Indiscriminate killing followed. In the first seconds of violence, the firing of carbines was deafening, filling the air with powder smoke. Among the dying who lay sprawled on the frozen ground was Bigfoot. Then there was a brief lull in the rattle of arms, with small groups of Indians and soldiers grappling at close quarters, using knives, clubs, and pistols. As few of the Indians had arms, they soon had to flee, and then the few Hotchkiss guns on the hill opened up on the ones running away, firing almost a shell a second, raking the Indian camp, shredding the teepees with flying shrapnel, killing men, women, and children. "We tried to run," Louise Weaselbear said, "but they shot us like we were a buffalo. I know there are some good white people, but the soldiers must be mean to shoot children and women. Indian soldiers would not do that to white children." "I was running away from the place and followed those who were running away," said Hakektawin, another of the young women. "My grandfather and grandmother and brother were killed as we crossed the ravine, and then I was shot on the right hip clear through and on my right wrist, where I did not go any further, as I was not able to walk. And after the soldiers picked me up, where a little girl came to me and crawled into the blanket." When the madness ended, Bigfoot and more than half of his people lay dead or seriously wounded. 153 were known dead, but many of the wounded crawled away to die afterward. One estimate placed the final total of dead at very nearly 300 of the original 350 men, women, and children that were in Bigfoot's camp. The soldiers lost 25 dead and 39 wounded, most of them struck by their own rifles or shrapnel. Now, after the wounded cavalrymen were started for the agency at Pine Ridge, a detail of soldiers went over the Wounded Knee battlefield, gathering up Indians who were still alive and loading them into wagons. As it was apparent by the end of the day that a blizzard was approaching, the dead Indians were left lying where they had fallen. After the blizzard, when a burial party returned to Wounded Knee, they found the bodies, including Bigfoot's, frozen into grotesque gestures and shapes. Now, if you can handle this, folks, it's graphic, but It's an old photo. This is Bigfoot. And this is a picture that was taken of him. And this is how they found them all the next morning. Let me call this picture up for you. And if you're not too squeamish about this sort of thing, this is how they found him. Remember, he was suffering from pneumonia. They had the company surgeon was tending to him. And he came out to talk, and he sat in front of his tent, his teepee, just before the shooting began. And he was one of the first ones killed when the soldiers opened up fire. And let me show this to you. This is how they found Bigfoot. Let me see where this picture ended up on my... Here he is. Now, this picture is very large. Here you can see his face very clearly. This was Chief Bigfoot. As they found him, you can see the markings even on this old photo. Bigfoot, Chief of the Brule, taken at the Battle of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Northwestern Photo Company, Chad, I can't read the whole name, Chadron Nelson or something like that, in 1891, this photo. So there he is, folks. That is Chief Bigfoot, who was killed that day at Wounded Knee. And this is how they found him the next day after the blizzard had subsided and they went to gather up the dead. And there he was, frozen in place. Now, if you're watching the video over on my YouTube channel, you'll be able to see this picture. Sorry to those listening audibly who are unable to see this photo. And you can go look these up on the internet as well. You can look up all the photos that were taken during this time when they were doing a cleanup, if you will, of the massacre at Wounded Knee. Now, the U.S. and the U.S. military referred to this as the Battle of Wounded Knee. It wasn't a battle at all. The only battling were those who fought back to try to keep themselves from being killed. So, the wagon loads of the Sioux, 4 men, 47 women and children, reached Pine Ridge after dark because only 47 people left. Because all available barracks were filled with soldiers, they were left lying in the open wagons in the bitter cold while an inept army officer searched for shelter. Finally, they did nothing to help these people ahead of time. Finally, the Episcopal mission was opened. The benches were taken out and hay scattered over all the rough flooring. It was the 4th day after Christmas in the year of our Lord, 1890, and when the first torn and bleeding bodies were carried into the candlelit church. Those who were conscious could see the Christmas greenery still hanging on the walls from the open rafters. Across the chancel front, above the pulpit, was strung a crudely worded banner that said, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men." Black Elk said this: "I did not know then how much was ended. When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch, as plain as when I saw them with my eyes still young. And I can see that something else died there at Wounded Knee in the bloody mud, and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. The nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead." That was Black Elk. And there's a song. The old men say the earth only endures. You spoke truly. You are right. Uchachahai lakin heya hap pe lo makakin lasela heya yonkelo ela pelo e hanke kon we ka yaka pelo. Good night, folks. Thanks for being here. We'll be back tomorrow night.